Okay, you guys are good. All loss will be at 441. Have a good round, everyone.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Would you like us to proceed?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for that little miscommunication. We're actually going to switch the presider and the scorer for this round. So we're going to call the docket for today's case. Plaintiff, any pretrial motions?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to make introduction before the court before we begin?
Please do.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Cameron, and today, along with my co-counsel, Emily Trumbull.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Lexi Cobbs, we will be
Your Honor.
We will be representing the estate of Genesis Petrillo. Your Honor, just before we begin, due to our university's policies, our attorneys will be required to wear masks, barring speeches. Our witnesses will be alone in rooms and will not be required to wear masks. Additionally, due to the format of today's trial, some of the attorneys may be wearing headphones in order to be heard and hear better.
All right, thank you.
Additionally, I would like to direct your attention to stipulation 3 that states that exhibits 1 through 10 in this case have been pre-admitted.
All right, noted.
And when we are referring to exhibits that have not yet been admitted, would you like us to share our screens and show the document before the exhibit is admitted, or admit the document and then share our screens to show?
You can show the document first, but ask permission.
Thank you. And finally, we would like to invoke Rule 615 with the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives.
All right, that'll be allowed. Does the plaintiff have a party representative in today's case?
No.
Defense counsel, do you have any objections to 615?
No, Your Honor.
Do you have any party representatives in today's case?
Yes, Your Honor. Harper Martini is our party representative today.
All right, Ms. Martini will constructively be, present at all matters of today's trial. In all witness testimony, all other witnesses will be constructively sequestered.
Thank you, Your Honor. And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Wonderful. Defense counsel.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Jakelly Fletcher, and I'm joined with my co-counsel, Nicole Stringer.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Davis Homrick.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And we represent the defendant, Ms. Harper Martini, in today's trial. Your Honor, the defense would like to direct your attention to a few documents that are relevant to today's trial. May I proceed?
Absolutely.
We have here the federal rules of evidence, as well as a copy of the stipulations for today's case. Do I have permission to share in the chat?
Yeah, I have a bench book, counselor.
Okay. Would you like me to still share the documents, or are you fine with what you have?
I've got them up right now.
All right. Also, the defense would like to take this time to ask the judge if we could share our time within the chat from our timekeepers.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd encourage it, although no team is required to do so. This is my fourth round judging, and we have had some time issues. So I think that being as transparent as possible with the remaining times with these new limitations that we're in is a great idea.
Thank you, Your Honor. With this, the defense is ready to proceed into openings.
Wonderful. Plaintiff. And I was told to instruct people during openings and closings to use speaker view.
May I proceed, Your Honor? She picked her poison. Once, there was an evil queen who loved only one thing in the entire world, her daughter. Casey had always been the princess of the castle, and the evil queen couldn't bear to be parted with her. So when a noble suitor won Casey's heart, the evil queen had to take action. She tried everything, manipulation and intimidation, but she didn't just stop there. The evil queen reigned over a winery. Her domain consisted of acres of vineyards. She was surrounded by grapes. It wasn't a difficult conclusion to arrive to. She picked her poison, and she put it in the wine. The noble suitor never stood a chance. On June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo unknowingly drank the poison wine. And on the 8th, he was dead. While it sounds like a fairy tale, it is important to remember that all good stories are wrapped around a core of truth. These events actually happened. The evil queen is the defendant in this case, Harper Martini, the owner of Peony Estates. Casey Soto is the princess of the castle, and the late Genesis Petrillo represents the noble suitor who, on the eve of his wedding, took not a bite from a poisoned apple, but a sip from poisoned wine. That sip sealed his fate as the victim in this tragic story. You, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, get to decide this story's ending. Will the evil queen get away with her misdeeds, or will she be held liable for her actions? We represent the family of Genesis Petrillo, and we are pursuing a claim of battery. That means that the defendant, Harper Martini, intentionally poisoned the wine with pesticide with the intent to cause harm to Genesis Petrillo. We have to prove that this is more likely than not. In order for you to decide how the story ends, you're going to need to get to know a few more characters. First, you'll hear from Riley Adkins O'Keefe, the inspector, who will tell you just how easily the defendant got her hands on her choice of poison, pesticide. Mr. Adkins inspected the defendant's winery multiple times in the months and years leading up to Genesis's death. From Mr. Adkins, you'll learn that the defendant had plenty of access to pesticides and knew just how dangerous that they could be to humans. Pesticides are a deadly poison. Second, you'll meet Dr. Kwan, a doctor working in the emergency room where Genesis was rushed after ingesting the poison. The doctor will explain to you exactly how the poison coursed its way through Genesis's system and tell you what symptoms he exhibited. She'll tell you how it led to only one possible conclusion, that Genesis Petrillo was poisoned. And she'll explain that that poison was a pesticide. And finally, you'll meet Sam Arnold, the caterer who was working the night of Genesis and Casey's rehearsal dinner. You'll learn from this caterer that there were pesticides at Peony Estates, the defendant's own winery. She'll also explain that the defendant was alone in the kitchen, alone with both the pesticide and the wine. Miss Arnold will also recount how the defendant gifted that poisoned bottle of wine directly to her victim. Members of the jury, this story sounds a lot like a fairy tale. Yes, it includes all the elements of your favorite bedtime stories. You grew up confident that the dragon would be slain, the troll under the bridge outsmarted, and the evil queen dethroned. Today, you will be able to write the final chapter in this story. Unfortunately, there will be no true love's kiss to wake Genesis Petrillo from his slumber. All that we can do is make sure that the defendant is held accountable for his death and that justice is served. That's up to you. All we ask you to do is follow the story. Harper Martini, the evil queen, picked her poison. She used a pesticide to bring about the death of her daughter's fiance. Now it's time for you to pick your poison. Find the defendant liable.
All right, thanks so much, Ms. Cobbs. Defense, ready for your opening?
Yes, Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to adjust my camera. Can you see and hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Begin when ready.
May it please the court. Good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon, members of the jury. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiff just told you a story. And in that story, they said some things. They assaulted Miss Martini's character. You'll meet Miss Martini, by the way. I'll let you decide if she's really evil. Now, they also argued that pesticide was available at a winery. And they also told you that the doctor made some analysis. And they also have some witnesses who said that the victim was alone from their perspective. Now, the only reason that they told you this information is because those are the only few and only factors which make this story convenient enough for them. They don't make it probable. The truth is they don't have any other proof that Harper Martini poisoned Genesis. Now, let's talk about proof. We as a defense do not have the burden of proof. No, that burden lies with the plaintiff. And they have to prove that it is more likely than not that Harper Martini poisoned Genesis Petrillo. Ladies and gentlemen, as you will see, the proof which they believe will shoulder this burden was in reality based upon a superficial and incomplete analysis of the evidence. You will see that the reason their story is so convenient is because they only told you half of it. Ladies and gentlemen, today my co-counsel and I will tell you the other half. We'll tell you what the plaintiff failed to include. And what did they fail to include? They failed to include that Harper Martini, despite having her differences with the fiance, nevertheless agreed to host, to pay for, and to organize the wedding. They also failed to mention that Harper Martini has no record of violence, but that she does have a record of trying to make amends with Genesis Petrillo. They failed to mention that despite Genesis and Harper Martini being surrounded by Peony Estate employees, catering staff, and friends and family, nobody saw Harper Martini tamper with the bottle of wine that allegedly poisoned Genesis. Nobody saw Harper do anything. They also failed to mention that Genesis's habits. They failed to mention Genesis's behavior regarding alcohol. And what they left out is that nobody knows how much Genesis drank that night. But what we do know is that Genesis had displayed several symptoms in line with alcohol poisoning. And finally, they failed to mention that the doctor who treated Genesis had failed to mention in his autopsy, he failed to account for Genesis's medical history. He failed to account for the fact that we don't know exactly what Genesis's blood alcohol content was at the time of death. Ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiff doesn't have the evidence. They don't have the proof. There is simply too much that they don't know, and there are too many questions that they have left unanswered. As a result, they were too quick to condemn. And after you account for the full evidence and see the gaps in their logic, we will stand before you in closing to ask that you find the defendant not liable.
Thank you, Mr. Homrich. All right. Plaintiff, do you have a case to present today?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff will begin by calling Riley Atkins O'Keefe to the stand.
All right, Riley Atkins O'Keefe, please take the stand. For the purpose of this trial, you are pre-sworn in.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Riley Adkins O'Keefe.
What do you do for a living?
Currently, I am the Senior Health and Safety Inspector for the Rapid River County Department of Health and Environmental Safety, also known as DHES, and I've held that position for about 3 years now, since 2017. However, I primarily conduct inspections on behalf of the FDA.
What is your educational background?
I received my bachelor's degree in 2010 from Xavier University, and then my Master of Science degree in Viticulture and Enology in 2012 from the Midlands University, Rapid River Valley.
How are you involved in today's case?
Through the course of my work, I became very familiar with the practices of the Peonia Estates, and I'm here to testify to that experience.
What experience do you have with Peony Estates?
I went there a number of times for my health inspections. I was able to have a full unrestricted tour of the property, as well as interview and have conversations with the owner and her employees.
And who is the owner of Peony Estates?
Harper Martini.
From your experience with Peony Estates, are you familiar with their 2019 batch of wine?
Yes, I am. During my second investigation, I spoke with the owner, Harper Martini, and the employees, and became familiar with the bottling and harvesting process of the Peony Estates.
How does the Peony Estates produce their wine?
The Peony Estates only grows one variety of grape, and because they only produce one variety of grape, they produce one batch of wine annually.
What do you mean the Peony Estates only produces one batch of wine annually?
Essentially, the Peony Estates takes the grapes harvested from the previous year, in this case, the 2018 batch of grapes, and then they then use those grapes in the 2019 variety of wine.
Did you test this 2019 variety of wine?
Yes, when I entered the wine cellar, I found a number of pests, and Harper informed me that they had recently used pesticide in the wine cellar.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I have to object at this moment.
On what grounds?
The evidence that is being testified here is in violation with the pretrial stipulations and the pre-court matters. I can display them for you and point out where if you'd like.
Before displaying, can you specify?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, under the pretrial motions under Section 1 for summary judgment, it says that the parties are admonished from any evidence at a trial that, I'll quote it, the parties are admonished that evidence at a trial is limited to the battery claim. Any evidence solely relevant to the negligence per se claim will be excluded. For example, neither party may enter any evidence or testimony related to whether the use and or storage of pesticides by Peony Estates comply with Section 12-100. He mentioned pests and he was about to mention pesticide and its location to them. That follows under Section 12-100 and is therefore barred from this trial.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yeah, Ms. Trumbull, please respond.
The purpose of that summary judgment was to say that we couldn't argue that negligence. That is not what this witness's statements are being used for. He's going to show, if I may proffer, Your Honor,
Please.
that in this wine that he tested, the levels of pesticides were very low compared to the wine that was tested later, in which the pesticide levels were very high. This change shows that there is potential harm and action on behalf of Harper Martini, which is relevant to the charge of battery, not relevant to the charge of negligence. We're not using this to try to prove negligence in today's case. We're using it to prove battery, Your Honor.
Yeah, okay. I'm inclined to agree, but Mr. Homrich, why is this a statement that goes against the summary judgment in the way that's proving negligence?
Now, summary judgment specifically states that neither party may enter any evidence or testimony related to the use and/or storage
You
of
said that,
pesticides.
sir. You
Right,
said
as
that.
to 12100.
I don't need to hear
12100
the
deals
same
with the
thing
storage
again.
of pesticides. So therefore, any testimony related to the use of storage was barred by the pretrial statements.
What statements of storage have been elicited thus far?
Excuse me, I expect to see statements of storage, but there have been statements of pests and mention of pests and proper control. Those pests are also under 12100 and are therefore also barred.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Yes.
I don't believe the witness said anything regarding pests. He's simply talking about this particular barrel of wine that he tested. I don't think he mentioned pests at all. And again, like I said, we're using this to prove battery, not negligence, so it doesn't fall under that pretrial stipulation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready to rule. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Mr. Atkins, would you continue what you were saying about this test of wine?
Yes, when I tested the wine, I took a test of 20% of all of the 2019 barrels of wine so as to make sure that they were safe for consumption.
Your Honor, permission to present Exhibit 9 to share that on the screen.
Sure.
Mr. Atkins, is this that test that you ran?
Yes, it is.
And does it appear fair and accurate, same as it did?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, this exhibit has already been pre-admitted, so I'm going to move forward.
All right.
Now, Mr. Atkins, what was the results of this test?
The results of this test said that there were contaminants in the wine. However, they were well within the guidelines and therefore they were safe for consumption.
Can you point us specifically what level of contaminants were there in this wine?
Well, specifically, it was in regards to the isophenphos organophosphate, which is a type of pesticide that the Peony Estates used. However, even though it shows that it is at 45, that's well within the guidelines that the FDA has for safe consumption.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Did you end up figuring out what variety of wine the 2019 batch was?
Yes, when I conducted my third investigation of the Peony Estates in 2019, I discovered a bottle in the bottling room that was titled Cara, and it also had the label on it of 2019, and therefore I assumed it was the 2019 variety.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Please.
Speculation requires entering the mind of a third party, and there's no third mind at all that the witness would be entering. He's simply reading off of a label that says that it is a 2019 wine and saying that then he believed that it was a 2019 wine.
Yeah, I don't think speculation is the right objection. Do you have another objection, Counselor?
Lack of foundation.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Was this Cara wine the same wine that you tested during your second investigation in 2018?
Yes, it was. The Peony Estates, again, produces an annual wine. Therefore, the grapes that were harvested in 2018 would have been put into barrels, they would have fermented, then they would have been bottled, and then they would have been released in the 2019 year. Then when I conducted my investigation, testing those barrels in 2018, that would have been the same variety as what was ultimately released in the 2019 year, which I said was of the Cara variety.
Are you aware of any other tests of that Cara wine?
Yes, after Genesis Petrillo's death, my office received an analytical report from the Midlands Rapid River Valley Police Department concerning the bottle of wine that Genesis consumed.
Your Honor, permission to bring Exhibit 10 onto the screen.
You may.
And this has already been pre-admitted. Mr. Adkins, what were the results of this test?
Well, specifically in regards to the isophenphos organophosphate, in the previous test, when I tested the wine barrels, it was 45. However, in this test, it's, as you can see, 91, which was well above the FDA regulations and therefore is completely not safe for consumption.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Is there anything significant about an isophenol-based pesticide?
Yes, during my investigation, I discovered that the only pesticide that Peonia Estates used was Bug Off, which is an isophenphos-based pesticide.
Do you know how that pesticide got into the bottle of Cara wine?
No, I tested a number of the 2018 barrels, as I said earlier, which were found to be completely normal levels of contamination, with contaminants. Therefore, the pesticide had to have entered the bottle between the barreling and bottling stage.
Why could it have not happened during the barreling stage?
Because when you open up a barrel, you tamper with the fermentation process, you introduce oxygen, which could spoil the entire batch. That's why I say it had to have happened at some point between when the wine went from the barrel to the bottle.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Trumbull. Mr. Homrich, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. O'Keefe, can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, I can.
Mr. O'Keefe, were you present the night of the wedding rehearsal?
No, I was not.
Now, were you present during the bottling process for that bottle of Cara wine that you saw?
No, I was not, no.
Now, are you sure which wine from which grapes went into that bottle of wine?
Well, again, the label said that it was of the 2019 version, and therefore, based on the way that the Peonia Estates produces their wine, being that it would be the 2018 year grapes, it would have had to have been the 2019 year version.
Did the bottle of wine say that it was from Peonia Estates?
I don't believe so.
Was there any marking on that bottle of wine that said it was specifically from Peonia Estates?
No, but I assumed that because the wine bottle was in the Peonia Estates, it was in the bottling area, that it was from the Peonia Estates.
But you didn't see it be made in Peonia Estates?
No, I did not.
You didn't see anybody else bring it into Peonia Estates?
We're talking about that specific bottle.
Same bottle, sir.
No.
Yeah. You don't know which wine is in that bottle.
Well, it was of the Cara variety.
Right, but you don't know where the Cara grapes were.
Well, no, but I do know that the Peonia Estates was working on the Cara variety, which was going to be the new kind of wine that they were going to be coming out with in 2019.
Right, and when did you see this bottle, sir?
I'm sorry, the bottle?
Yes.
I saw it on my third investigation and subsequently on my follow-up investigation. That would be my fourth one. So that would be May 8th and May 30th.
Now, I'm now displaying what has already been pre-admitted as Exhibit 11. Or excuse me, Exhibit 10. You recognize this exhibit, right?
Yes.
Could you please specify which test sample this was from?
I think it's at the bottom of the report where it says that it was collected from the inside of an empty bottle of Cara wine found in the trash.
Right. Now, were you there when this bottle was thrown away?
No, I was not present. However, it was forwarded to me by the Midlands Police Department.
Are you aware of any other items that might have been in that trash?
I do not, no.
Are you aware that there was also a bottle of pesticide in that trash?
No.
Thank you. Your Honor, no further questions.
All right, any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked the witness step down.
All right, Mr. Atkins O'Keefe, the court thanks you for your service today. You are free to go.
Thank you.
Plaintiff, do you have another witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Dr. Kwan to the stand.
Dr. Kwan, you've already been sworn in. Please take the stand. Proceed when ready.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jamin Kwan.
What do you do, Dr. Kwan?
I am the Chief Emergency Physician at River Valley Hospital in Midlands.
Could you tell us a little about your educational background?
Certainly. I received my bachelor's in biology from Georgia Tech in 1993, and then I received my MD from UNC Chapel Hill in 1997. Following that, I went back to Georgia to Emory University Hospital, where I completed my residency in 2001, and then I completed a fellowship there in toxicology in 2003.
What other kinds of work experience do you have?
Well, after I finished my fellowship, I moved to Midlands in 2003, where I began working as an ER physician at Midlands St. Joseph Hospital until about 2008. I then started working as a senior ER physician at Sacred Heart of Midlands Hospital, and then I left that position in 2015 to start my current position as chief ER physician at River Valley. I also have certifications in emergency medicine, medical toxicology, and internal care, critical care medicine from the American Board of Emergency Medicine certifications. Additionally, I have 5 publications in the fields of toxicology and emergency medicine.
How did you get involved in today's case?
I was Genesis Petrillo's treating physician when he was brought into the hospital the morning of June 8th, 2019.
Were you able to come to any conclusions about that case?
Yes, I was.
What method did you use to come to your diagnosis?
Whenever any ER physician across the country needs to make a final diagnosis, we always look at the symptoms, the analysis, and the labs. I use this method carefully examining the progression of Genesis symptoms that I witnessed myself. I looked at the lab results from the tests that I ordered, and I used all this information together to create an analysis, which results in a final comprehensive diagnosis.
Was the method you used standard in your field?
Of course, it's used by every ER physician across the country.
And is it reliable?
Of course.
What kinds of facts and data did you use in today's case?
I used my own thorough examination of Genesis Petrillo's case. I also used the toxicology reports that I ordered, which included blood analysis, stomach content analysis, and I also used reports provided to me later regarding Genesis's case.
Did you apply all of this reliably?
I did.
What symptoms was Genesis Petrillo exhibiting when he first was admitted into the ER?
When Genesis was brought into the ER by one of his friends, Genesis was clearly intoxicated. He reeked of wine and was vomiting and was feeling very nauseous. I made sure that my team took vomit samples and got those straight to the lab. And after learning more about Genesis' symptoms, noticing slurred speech, and I was able to initially diagnose Genesis with alcohol poisoning, and that allowed me to admit Genesis as a patient to the hospital.
How did your examination proceed?
Well, once Genesis was admitted, I was then able to complete my comprehensive examination, which included taking vitals, more blood samples, vomit samples, and monitoring Genesis's condition. And as I continued my examination, I noticed a number of significant irregularities in the symptoms that Genesis was experiencing.
What kind of irregularities?
Well, first, Genesis was having a lot of trouble breathing and was undergoing noticeable muscle twitches. And while I was monitoring Genesis's breathing, I noticed that he was wheezing and coughed when I asked him to take a deep breath. Additionally, when I shined a light into his eyes, there was excessive tearing. His pupils were contracted. He had a slowed pulse, and he had a slow pulse.
Taken together, what do all of these symptoms mean?
Well, importantly, they were not consistent with my initial diagnosis of alcohol poisoning, but instead they were consistent with something called organophosphate poisoning. It was at this point I promptly ordered an unknown poisons and toxins analysis, as well as a standard toxicology report.
What are organophosphates?
An organophosphate is an ester from phosphoric acid. It basically just means it's a compound that comes from this acid, and they're commonly used in any form of insecticides and pesticides. And when they're ingested by humans, they can be incredibly dangerous and become fatal very quickly.
How would someone be poisoned by an organophosphate?
Well, there are 3 primary ways. It can be absorbed through the skin. It can also be inhaled by a person if it's been sprayed and suspended in the air, and additionally, if it's been mixed in with something and ingested. The way we find this out is by testing for an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase.
What is acetylcholinesterase?
Acetylcholinesterase. It's an important enzyme that breaks down any acetic acid and choline compounds that come into the body so that they can be used as neurotransmitters. Essentially, the nervous system can absolutely not function without these enzymes, and at a low level, it's very dangerous. And again, this level can tell you whether or not a person has been poisoned with organophosphates, since organophosphates severely diminish the production of these enzymes.
So coming back to Genesis's case, what happened after you started noticing all those irregular symptoms?
Genesis's condition began to worsen incredibly quickly. I administered an organophosphate antidote, but unfortunately, we did everything we could, and despite our best efforts, Genesis fell into a coma. And then at 9:27 a.m., I had to pronounce Genesis Petrillo dead.
Dr. Kwan, you previously mentioned that you'd ordered a number of labs. What labs were those again?
I ordered a standard blood toxicology report as well as an unknown poisons and toxins analysis.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to show the witness Exhibit 6 and 10, which have been previously admitted.
All right, you're free to do so.
So this is Exhibit 6. What are we looking at right now, Doctor?
So there are two important sections on this report, kind of each labeled by specimen. The first tells us about Genesis's blood work, and the second describes the result of the testing from the vomiting sample, which tells us about Genesis's stomach contents.
Okay, let's start with talking about the blood work. What does this report tell us about it?
It first tells us that there was ethyl alcohol found in his system, which is consistent with the intoxicated state. Also, importantly, there were traces of organophosphate poison that were detected in the blood.
What did the report say about Genesis's stomach contents?
This report corroborated the blood work in that it found both alcohol and organophosphate compounds. It also reported that Genesis had been drinking wine, and when my analyst, Dr. Sanderson, analyzed the contents of the stomach, he found no evidence that the poison had come from any of the other food contents in the stomach.
You mentioned that there was wine in his system. Could you say anything more about that?
Yes, I was later provided with a laboratory report of a wine bottle that Genesis may have drank from the evening before he died.
That's Exhibit 10. What is significant about this report, Doctor?
The most important thing about this report is that, there it is, it highlights that the wine that Genesis drank had dangerously high levels of isothymphos organophosphate. As you can see, it was at 91 when that was almost double the required amount or the limit required by the FDA or the FDA. In short, this wine was clearly contaminated.
What was the wine contaminated with?
Organophosphates, yes.
With all of this considered, were you able to come to any conclusions?
Yes, I was.
What was your final diagnosis of Genesis Petrillo?
After taking in all the symptoms that I closely monitored, the lab results, and my full professional analysis of his case, I can say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Genesis Petrillo suffered from organophosphate poisoning, which led to respiratory arrest and most likely caused by the wine that he drank the evening before he died.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions.
All right, sorry, just finishing up some notes there. All right, thank you, Ms. Cobbs. Ms. Fletcher, your witness.
Hi, Dr. Kwan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, Dr. Kwan, you are a medical professional. Is that right?
That's true.
And you take pride in being thorough in your diagnosis of your patients. Is that right?
That I do.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you prepared a medical report for this case?
Yes, I did.
Now, I want to focus your attention on the contents in your report. Now, you measured the blood alcohol content of Genesis Petrillo that morning. Is that right?
Yes. My blood or my lab analyst completed analysis of the blood and found it to be 0.16.
Yeah, so you agree with this determination that Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content was indeed 0.16%. Is that correct?
Correct.
You also agree that blood alcohol content fluctuates over time. Is that correct?
It doesn't necessarily fluctuate, so no.
You agree that blood alcohol content is affected by numerous variables. Is that correct?
It's affected by how much a person drinks, yes.
So the number of drinks affects the blood alcohol content and overall alcohol intoxication.
Yes.
The time frame when an alcohol beverage is consumed also affects the blood alcohol content and overall intoxication.
That's also true.
You need to know all these things in order to have an accurate blood alcohol content read. Is that correct?
Well, you don't need to have that to know what the blood results tell you, no.
No, but in order for you to accurately determine the blood alcohol content, you have to know at least one or two of these variables. Is that correct?
Well, I was able to determine the blood alcohol content from the report that I was given, and generally those reports are trusted in my field of work.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you mentioned acetylcholinesterase levels in your direct examination, correct?
Yes, I did.
But acetylcholinesterase levels can be influenced by or lowered by underlying medical issues and medications. Is that correct?
That's true. They typically don't get lowered to the level at which organophosphate poisoning does, because obviously taking a medication at a reasonable amount won't lower it to the point that you would die as long as you're taking the correct dosage of this medication. But yes, it's possible.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you don't know how much Genesis drank before arriving at the hospital. Is that correct?
I'm not entirely certain of the number of drinks that Genesis had. No.
You don't know the alcohol percentage of the wine Genesis drank, do you?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
You didn't include Genesis' medical history within your report, is that correct?
I didn't include it within my report. It's standard that any doctor looks at the medical history of a patient, but because it's so standard, sometimes we just don't include it in the report.
So you forgot to include the medical history within the report?
I didn't forget. It's just not standard to always include it.
Now, you didn't note in your report if Genesis had any underlying medical issues, did you?
No, I found no evidence of that.
You didn't note if Genesis was taking any medications in your report?
I didn't notice that, no.
You didn't mention an autopsy for Petrillo in your medical report?
No, I did conduct the final diagnosis of Genesis, though.
But an autopsy wasn't mentioned in your report, is that correct?
No, it wasn't. I had all the information that I needed from analyzing Genesis' condition myself when he was brought into the ER and watching him go through the poisoning.
Now, alcohol intoxication complicates the management and treatment of patients with organophosphate intoxication, is that correct?
It can, yes.
You didn't add an alcohol intoxication to the chain of events that led to Genesis Petrillo's death, did you?
No, I didn't, because generally, again, Genesis's BAC was 0.16, and that is not at a level that causes any fatal symptoms. So it didn't exactly contribute to Genesis's death per se.
But Genesis was intoxicated, correct?
Yes, but not to a level that was fatal.
And alcohol intoxication can complicate the treatment of someone with organophosphate poisoning. Is that correct?
In some cases it can, especially if there's a lot of alcohol consumed. But again, Genesis's BAC was at 0.16, which is not a fatal BAC by any means.
So you don't know the peak levels of alcohol intoxication, BAC levels, do you?
I'm not sure of the peak, but considering the fact that BAC does decrease quite slowly at a rate, no matter when Genesis stopped drinking, the BAC really wouldn't have been that much different from when it was tested.
You tested 3 hours after the fact that when Genesis came in, is that correct?
The test result came in about 3 a.m., but we did take the blood sample when Genesis came in.
You tested Genesis' blood alcohol content as soon as Genesis came into the hospital?
We took the blood samples when Genesis was admitted as a patient. The test results didn't come back till much later.
Dr. Kwan, your report lacks much medical information regarding Petrillo's history, medical history. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Please remind me of the question.
Dr. Kwan, your report lacks much medical information regarding Petrillo. Is that correct?
Okay. Plaintiff, can you elaborate?
Yes, Your Honor. This opposing counsel has already spent a good amount of time previously in the cross establishing whether or not this witness looked at Genesis Petrillo's medical history. We've been through this already.
All right. Ms. Fletcher, do you have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
With the response?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just trying to elaborate on the fact that Dr. Kwan lacks many of the things that a medical report is supposed to contain about a patient.
Okay, so what information will we be getting from this answer from Dr. Kwan that we have not been able to elicit in previous statements?
The answer would be whether a yes or no to whether or not they are aware that their medical report lacks much needed information to make a full and correct diagnosis of Genesis Petrillo.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Yeah. Opposing counsel has asked this witness these things already. She has asked her about Genesis Petrillo's medical history. She has asked her about when she took the blood samples, when she ordered the test. This witness has already answered these questions, and she has explained why she put what she put in her report and why she didn't put in her report what she didn't put in her report.
Yeah, it's a close one, but as an answered is a pretty high bar to sustain. So I'm going to overrule it, but let's keep it to this question. If we aren't able to get a clear answer, Dr. Kwan, I would appreciate if you can answer this question with truthfulness and as directly as possible. That way we can move on from this line of questioning, but overruled.
Dr.
Can you
Kwan,
repeat the question? Sorry, thank you.
you're fine, Dr. Kwan. Dr. Kwan, your report lacks much medical information regarding Petrillo. Is that correct?
I don't think it lacks anything important, no.
But it does lack information about Petrillo's health and
It
medical.
doesn't lack anything important.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Kwan. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Fletcher. Ms. Cobbs, do you have a redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, proceed when ready.
Dr. Kwan, could you explain to the jury what you took into account when coming to the diagnosis you made on Genesis Petrillo's death?
Of course, I mainly took into account all of the symptoms that I noticed myself when Genesis came in. I used all the labs and the toxicology reports and any other labs and reports that were provided to me later. I did look at Genesis's medical history, but I found nothing pertinent that would apply directly to my diagnosis.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Nothing further.
All right, any recross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Dr. Kwan, thank you so much for the time. You have the court's thanks. You are free to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, plaintiff, do you have another witness to call this for your case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Sam Arnold.
All right, Ms. Arnold, you've already been sworn in, and proceed when ready.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sam Arnold.
What do you do for a living, Miss Arnold?
I'm the head chef and owner of Sam's Kitchen here in Midlands.
Did you ever cater an event for Peony Estates?
Oh yeah, all the time. I catered the first party she ever threw for the first anniversary of Peony Estates, and everyone loved the food, so she kept inviting me back. She's been my very best customer ever since. I actually get most of my business through Harper.
What was the last event you catered at Peony Estates?
That must have been the rehearsal dinner for Miss Harper's daughter's wedding. I was supposed to cater the wedding reception the next day too, but we never got that far.
Do you know what the relationship was like between the defendant and Genesis?
Yeah, they did not get along, to say the very least.
What makes you say they didn't get along?
Well, while we were planning for the
One
wedding,
second. Miss Arnold, give me 1 sec. Ms. Stinger, did you object to lack of personal knowledge?
Yes, Your Honor. May I elaborate?
Please do.
There is no foundation as to why this defendant would know the relationship between Harper and Genesis, and she hasn't even said why she knew Genesis or how she knew Genesis Petrillo.
Ms. Cameron?
Yes, Your Honor. She already stated that she has done many events with Harper, and my next question was actually laying the foundation of why she knew or why she thought that the relationship between Genesis and Harper was they did not get along.
Okay, Ms. Stinger, I'm going to tentatively overrule the objection. If they don't get to that within the next question or two, please re-raise.
Yes, Your Honor.
Miss Arnold, did you know Genesis Petrillo?
I met him and the wedding party all together, but I knew Harper better than anyone else.
And what makes you say that Harper and Genesis did not get along?
Well, I was there for all of the planning of the wedding events. And one day when we were doing that, Miss Harper was going on and on about how selfish and immature Genesis was getting. I mean, she was pissing a hissy fit about this whole wedding. I mean, we talked for a little bit longer and then I left to set up for my event that day. And she slams this big old bowl down on the counter and she shouted, "Anyone but Genesis, literally anyone."
I want to now talk
question,
about
hearsay. That quote was hearsay.
All right. Remind me who stated the quote.
Harper, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Ms. Cameron, a response?
According to 801 D2D, the opposing party statements are allowed and making them are allowed as allowed in.
I'm inclined to believe, Ms. Stinger, why would this not fall under party opponent?
It does. I misread the quote. I withdraw my objection, Your Honor. Sorry.
No problem, Ms. Stinger. All right, that is going to be overruled.
I want to now talk about the day of the rehearsal dinner. The medical examiner has determined that at some point that day, Genesis ingested pesticides. Is there any possibility that your food was contaminated with pesticides?
Absolutely not. I mean, I take great pride in my food. Everyone there ate some of everything at dinner, and Genesis was the only one who got sick. It couldn't have been from my food.
Did you see Harper the day of the rehearsal dinner?
Yes, ma'am. I got there around 11 o'clock in the morning that day to set up, and I went in the kitchen to get started, but everything was just a disaster. And Harper was the only one in there. I mean, she said she kicked everyone out because she needed it all to herself to bottle this special wine she made just for Genesis. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
What do you mean you couldn't believe it?
I don't know. I mean, everything just felt off. Like when Harper told me she was bottling the wine just for Genesis, I mean, she'd never had anything nice to say about him before. So I couldn't believe she was going out of her way to make something special for him.
Did anything else feel out of place?
Yeah, when I asked what type of wine it was, she said it was called Cara, which is strange because I am always down in that wine cellar for events I cater trying to find the perfect wine to pair with my food, and I had never seen a cask of Cara. I mean, I have no idea where she could have hidden a completely different class of wine. And then there was that bottle of pesticides.
Did anything else strike you from that interaction?
Yeah, like I said, there was this big old bottle of bug off pesticides sitting right next to her on the counter, right where she was holding the bottle of wine.
Where exactly was that bottle of bug off?
It was right there on the counter. I mean, it is so dangerous. You should never have pesticides in a kitchen. Anyone in the food industry knows that.
Did you ask her what the pesticides were for?
Yeah, she got this big old grin like a possum eating a sweet potato, and she said the pesticides were there to kill pests like Genesis.
And do you know who the bottle of wine was for?
Yeah, it was for Genesis. Harper had given it to me to give to him later that night.
When did Harper give it to you?
Well, I was in the kitchen still preparing food. Once she finished bottling it, she handed it to me, and I just had to give it to Genesis after the dinner was over.
Did you ever see anyone else touch this bottle?
No, I mean, I held on to it for the entire time I was in the kitchen, and no one else touched it. I am so scatterbrained sometimes. I wanted to make sure it was always in eyesight so I didn't forget to hand it off.
Did you ever see anyone else drink from this bottle?
No, Harper really emphasized in her speech that night that the wine bottle was just for Genesis and that absolutely no one else should have it, and that Genesis should wait until he was all alone to have some.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cameron. Ms. Stinger, your witness.
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Arnold. Before I begin, can you hear and see me correctly?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Okay. Ms. Arnold, you first met Harper Martini in 2016, is that correct?
That's correct.
It was at a party?
Yes.
And you catered for this party?
I did.
And you've been working with Peony Estates ever since then, is that correct?
I have. Miss Harper has been so wonderful. She's one of my best clients.
And you describe Harper as being nothing short of friendly, is that correct?
As long as you're on her good side, she likes you just fine.
And you described Peony Estates as always having numerous staff and guests on the premises. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Arnold, you first saw the 2019 Carroll wine bottle on June 7th, 2018. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
It was in Peony's Estates kitchen.
Yes, Miss Harper was putting the label and stuff on it.
You also saw a pesticide canister on the kitchen counter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You did not see the pesticide canister open?
Well, see, it wasn't like pesticide canisters. They don't come in like a lid. It's a spray, so I don't really know if it was open, but the spray top was not connected to the bottle anymore.
But you cannot say if the canister was full or empty. Is that correct?
No, I can't.
You did not see Harper do anything with this pesticide canister. Is that correct?
No, not while I was there.
You did not see Harper do anything with the 2019 Carroll wine bottle at this time. Is that correct?
That's not correct. I saw her putting the label and stuff on it.
But then Miss Martini did not open the bottle. Is that correct?
Not while I was there, no.
And Harper asked you to gift the wine bottles to the guests at the party. Is that correct?
That's true.
And you stated on direct examination that you never saw the 2019 Carroll wine at Peony Estates prior before June 7th. Is that correct?
No, I hadn't been at an event lately. I didn't see anything there.
But Harper did tell you that the reason for that was because it was in the bottling area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
She also told you that it was because it was a new wine and it was unreleased. Is that correct?
That's what she said.
Now, you presented the Carroll wine to Genesis at the party. Is that correct?
Yes, that is very correct.
And later during that party, you saw that Genesis had a glass of champagne also. Is that correct?
Yeah, right before all the speeches happened, I passed around champagne to everyone so they could toast with it.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down.
All right, absolutely. Mr. Arnold, the court thanks you for your service. You are free to go. Does the plaintiff have more evidence to present?
No, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff rests its case in chief.
All right, thank you for that. I like to give more time in between closing, so let's stick to 5 minutes for now, and get back at 3:13. All right. Can someone from plaintiff and defense confirm that everyone is back and ready to go?
The plaintiff
Yes,
is
ready to proceed.
All right, wonderful. Defense, are you going to be presenting a case today?
We will be, Your Honor.
All right, please call your first witness.
Defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
All right. Ms. Osborne, you have already been sworn in, and Mr. Homrich, you can proceed when ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Blair Osborne.
How are you doing today, Ms. Osborne?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine, thanks for asking. Could you please explain why you're here today?
Well, I am here to testify everything that I know about the events leading up to the death of Genesis Petrillo.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a private event planner, and I'm also CEO, CFO. I own Bliss by Blair Events, and I was rated #1 in Rapid River Valleys for 4 years.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Now, I would like to begin by focusing on your history and relationship with the defendant, Harper Martini. When did you first meet Ms. Martini?
I met Harper and Casey in 2015. Ever since then, they've been like family to me.
Have you worked with Ms. Martini frequently since then?
Of course, in the course of these 4 years, I have planned over 80 events at Peony Estates. So it's safe to say that I've made a good bit of money with this partnership.
Tell us about working at Peony Estates.
It is amazing. This Harper and her staff, they are very precise with everything related to guest relations. I wouldn't have my name attached to anything else.
Now, how specifically did you become involved with the wedding between Casey and Genesis?
Well, Harper called me on October 6, 2018, and she asked me to plan the wedding for Casey and Genesis. And like I said, they're like my family. So of course I was excited. And I was given a 15% increase to plan with discretion. So of course I put my best foot forward.
How was the planning process?
It was awful. As much as I love Harper and Casey, it was just too much for me. Everybody wanted something different. And like I said, I've planned over 80 events with Peony Estates. And Harper has been very attentive in these events, but this was just, it was a lot. It was her daughter's wedding though, so I do understand.
I would like to turn to the day of the wedding rehearsal. This is now June 7th, 2019. How would you describe the day of the wedding rehearsal?
I felt that there was tension. I was busy planning everything, putting everything together. I personally didn't see Genesis and Harper interact too much that night, but I felt that it was just, you know, the room was just, it was tense.
How did the rest of the day go?
It went fine until it was time to make toast.
What happened at the toasting?
There were just some verbal jabs. Harper mentioned something about how she was happy that the wedding was finally happening. And I'm sorry, yeah, that was it. It was nothing too deep.
What happened after the toasting?
After the toasting, I was trying to figure out a way to make the tension go down, but Harper actually stepped up and took the first move. I was surprised.
What did Harper do?
Harper gifted Genesis with a bottle of wine, and while I knew was going to gift the entire wedding party with gifts, I just didn't expect this to be so lovely. The tension that I felt before, it was gone.
Did anything happen after the wine gifting?
After that, I can't really be sure. My focus was on a million other things. I do know that I saw Genesis pour more than one glass of that wine.
Did anything happen after that?
After that, the night ended around midnight. I did see Genesis, Angel Rodriguez, and Drew Matsoukas sitting at the bar. I told them to drink some water because I didn't want them to be hungover, and then I went to bed.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
To whose statement?
The witnesses.
Okay, what statement was elicited?
That she told those 3 people at the bar to drink water.
Okay. Mr. Humrich, what's your response to the claim of hearsay from Miss Osborne's statement to wedding guests to drink water?
Your Honor, this is my witness making the statement. She's allowed to say what she did that day.
And
I could also provide an exception under Rule 803 that this describes statement.
Maybe just do the attorneys want to take a minute to either confer with co-counsel or to review case law?
no, Your Honor. May I respond?
Yes, please.
According to America's Best Cookie but versus International House of Waffles, the definition of hearsay does include out-of-court statements by a witness who was on the stand. So this witness's statement that she told these people to drink water classifies as hearsay under that piece of case law.
Thank you. And Mr. Humrich, how does this not fall under America's Best Cookie versus IHOW?
One moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, under Rule 803.3, this statement is admissible as hearsay as it falls under declarant's state of mind.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
No need. I'm going to sustain the objection. I don't think that falls under 803.3. Yeah, that's sustained.
Very well. Now, Miss Osborne, I would just like to move on to the actual day of the wedding that morning. How did the day begin?
Well, I got there at 6:30. It was pretty early, but planning a wedding is a full-time job. So we moved some furniture around. We waited on the floral arrangements, and then Harper got there around 7:15, I want to say. Yeah.
Did you say anything to Harper when she was there?
I did. I asked her how she felt about the wedding. You know, it was the wedding day, and she said that she just wanted the day to be perfect for Casey. I gave her a hug, and then we decided to go and wake up the wedding party.
But what happened after that?
Well, when we got to Casey's room, she was already awake. But when I got to Genesis and Angel, they were missing. So I let Harper know.
What did you do when you couldn't find Genesis?
I texted Genesis and Angel immediately. I decided not to tell Casey because I didn't want to worry her on her big day. But like I said, I did let Harper know. How
did Harper react?
She said that if Genesis was somewhere hungover, that he was never going to hear the end of it and that she was going to make his life a living hell. I just wanted to make sure we found them.
Did anything happen after that?
After that, I want to say around 8:30, Angel Rodriguez came and let us know that Genesis had fallen into a coma, and goodness, it was downhill from there.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. No further questions.
All right. Ms. Cobbs, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Osborne, it was the defendant who first reached out to you about Casey and Genesis's wedding in October of 2018?
Yes, I was very excited to be involved.
In fact, Casey and Genesis didn't even know that the defendant had reached out to you, did they?
Like I said, I was paid 15% extra to plan it with discretion.
But you didn't actually meet with the bride and the groom until January of 2009, did you?
Yes, it was a pleasant meeting, actually.
And Genesis and the defendant were constantly giving you contradicting information regarding the wedding?
Well, like I said before, everybody wanted different things. Everyone wanted to be perfect, and everybody had a different idea of perfect, so yes.
And there was a lot of crying and fighting between the members of the wedding party, wasn't there?
There was a lot of tension, yes.
At one point in May, you met with just Casey and the defendant, her mother.
Yes.
And the defendant played a voicemail from Genesis for you and Casey.
Yes, it was crazy.
After that voicemail, the defendant said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
That sounds about like what Harper said. Harper was very dramatic.
That's a yes to my question.
Yes.
But then the defendant got another call during that meeting.
Yes.
And
I
the
was
defendant-
busy with like I said, this was a meeting about the wedding, so I wasn't listening too much to their conversation. It's eavesdropping. It's not right.
But you did hear the defendant say, no, keep the car bottle where it is. No, don't have them move the pesticide.
I overheard something about the pesticides and maybe some car wine mentioning, but like I said, I was trying my hardest not to eavesdrop.
But you heard that statement, didn't you?
What was the statement again? I'm sorry.
No, keep the car bottle where it is. No, don't have them move the pesticide.
Something along those lines, I believe, yes.
Now I'd like to move on and talk about the rehearsal dinner.
Okay.
At the rehearsal dinner, Genesis and the defendant were still insulting each other, weren't they?
There were some verbal jabs, but afterwards, everything calmed down.
But the defendant picked Genesis a special bottle of wine.
Yes, like I said, I expected the entire wedding party to get a gift, but I didn't expect it to be such a lovingly presentation to Genesis. It
But
really.
Genesis's bottle was special.
Yes, it was. He is the groom. I would imagine it'd be different from the wedding party.
The defendant told Genesis, I got this just for you.
Yes.
The defendant told Genesis not to drink that bottle of wine in front of other people.
Yeah, well, this was a gift specially made for Genesis, so I would assume so.
But she did say that.
Yes, she did. It's not unusual.
The defendant then said, I want this special bottle to be just for you when you have a private moment to reflect on everything you have done.
Well, like I said, this was a very generous occasion, and Harper gave wine to every member of the wedding party, but Genesis is the groom, so of course you would think that Genesis would be, something special, not the same thing that everybody's getting. It's Genesis.
Miss Osborne, redirecting you back to my question, she did make that statement?
Yes, she did.
And then you saw Genesis pour the wine.
Yes, I saw him pour more than one glass, actually.
But just to be clear, you never saw anybody else handle this wine?
No, like I said, I was busy with other things. I just looked over, saw Genesis pouring 2 glasses of wine, and I kept on about my day.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. You never saw anybody drink this wine? Anybody other than Genesis?
No.
But in the next day, Genesis died.
Unfortunately, yes, he did. That's why we're here. Yes.
But previously, you talked to the defendant about just this kind of thing happening, didn't you?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
When you met the defendant in May 2019, Harper said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
I can't speak to whether that is exactly what this is, but like I said before, I did hear that statement. And like I said, Genesis had passed, but like I said, I can't speak to the connection of these 2 things.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Nothing further.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Free redirect, Your Honor.
All right.
Ms. Osborne, during your tenure, let's say, at Peony Estates, did you ever see anybody tamper with any bottles of wine?
No, that's out of the scope of what I do.
Had you seen anybody tamper with any bottles of pesticide?
It's out of the scope of what I do.
You had seen...
Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning was not brought up in my cross-examination. I didn't ask her anything about pesticides.
All right, Counselor, how does this fit into the scope of the cross?
I'm just about to get there. The entire argument is based upon pesticides being in this one bottle of wine. As we were about to establish, she didn't know which bottle of wine was being used here.
You can't ask any questions that aren't in the scope, so it's not about getting there. How have the previous questions related to the scope of the cross?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. They were out of the scope. We're happy to redact them.
All right, we'll strike the testimonial listed thus far, and you can proceed from here.
Ms. Osborne, as you had answered on your cross-examination, you saw Genesis be presented with a bottle of wine.
Yes, very movingly.
Did you see Genesis drink that bottle of wine?
No, I didn't.
You don't know which bottle Genesis drank.
No, I just saw him pour 2 glasses. I don't know who it was
No further
for.
questions. May the witness be excused, Your Honor.
Give me 1 second to finish on my notes. Okay, any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Osborne, thank you very much for your time. The court thanks you for your service. You are excused.
Thank you.
Does the defense have any additional evidence for its case?
Yes, Your Honor, we do. May we call our next witness?
You may.
The defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
All right, Harper Martini. Miss Martini, you have already been sworn in. And the defense, you may proceed whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Martini. Just for the record, can you please state your name for the jury?
Yes, my name is Harper Martini.
And Ms. Martini, where do you work?
I am the owner of Peony Estates. That's where I currently work at.
Can you explain how you founded Peony Estates?
Of course. It's always been a lifelong dream of mine to open up my own winery. Loving wine has been in my family for so long. And one day I decided to do just that. I got a startup loan. I quit my job at Rosie and Pedro. And before I knew it, I owned Peony Estates.
Has Peony Estates been successful during the time of its opening?
Yes, it definitely has. It's the #1 winery in all of Midlands. And we also have a wedding venue, and it was always booked 2 years in advance. But like any other business, some issues occur.
Can you elaborate on those issues for us?
Of course. We had a bit of an insect issue, but we used pesticides to, fix up the issue really quickly. My staff and I were very attentive about it.
Okay, let's move on to your family life for a moment. Ms. Martini, can you tell us about your daughter, Casey Soto?
Of course. Casey is my one and only daughter. After my husband passed away when she was just a toddler, I had to raise her as a single mother. But I always made sure to give Casey the best of everything, whether it was her piano lessons to her education. She was my little protege. Yeah, Casey's all that I have.
And Ms. Martini, just for the record, how did you know Genesis Petrillo?
Genesis was my daughter's late fiance.
And what was your relationship with Genesis Petrillo like?
Well, for the most part, really didn't connect very well. I kept trying to reach out, but nothing ever stuck.
Why do you say that?
There's this one time that I tried to host a lunch with Casey and Genesis and I to get to know each other as a family, but Genesis ended up rescheduling so many times, and frankly, based on so many occasions, Casey just wasn't herself when she was around Genesis.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, there was this one time where we hosted Casey's 24th birthday at my estate, and Genesis had bet Casey that she couldn't finish an entire wine glass of each of our vintage wines. Casey ended up taking Genesis on that offer, and she eventually was hospitalized with alcohol poisoning. And there was also this one time where Genesis sent me this odd voicemail.
Ms. Martini, would you be able to recognize that voicemail today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to share my screen.
Sorry, what will you be sharing?
A transcript of a voicemail marked as Exhibit 8, which has been pre-admitted pursuant Stipulation 3.
All right, we're going to presume that the members of the jury cannot see the screen share, but go ahead for now.
Thank you, Mr. Homrick.
Oh, this has been pre-admitted. All right, never mind.
Yes, pursuant under Stipulation 3.
Okay, all right, never mind. This is already in evidence, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Now, Miss Martini, do you recognize Exhibit 8?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a transcript of the voicemail that I got from Genesis.
And what is the day and time of that voicemail?
It's May 12th, 2019 at 1:12 a.m.
Now, what did Genesis say to you in this voicemail?
Well, Genesis was talking about moving to Paris with Casey, but it really wasn't like the content of the message, but rather how he sounded.
Well, how did Genesis sound?
He kept rambling, his words were slurred. And then with the fact that it was 1:12 a.m., I assumed he was drunk. So I took whatever he said in that voicemail with a grain of salt.
Your Honor, lack of personal knowledge to the statement that Genesis was drunk.
All
May I
right.
respond?
Yeah, please.
Your Honor, the witness has testified that she heard Genesis's words were slurred and rambling. She's not directly testifying that she was drunk. She's saying she's assuming that she is based on her rationally based perception.
All right, Ms. Tremblay, in response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. To be drunk is a form of a medical diagnosis. You have to reach a certain blood alcohol content to be considered drunk. Ms. Martini is in no situation to be able to give us that kind of information. All she's heard is simply a voice recording of Genesis. And to say that Genesis was drunk based off simply that voice memo, she simply doesn't have the information to be able to give that to us.
All right, Ms. Trumbull, so are you suggesting that possibly this will require scientific or technical knowledge?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So at that point, I think that does not fit lack of personal knowledge. What other objection do you have, if any?
An improper opinion, Your Honor.
Under Rule
701.
Great. All right. How do you respond to Rule 701, ma'am?
Your Honor, the more technical term for drunk is intoxicated. And like my witness said, she assumed she was drunk. So this is not directly testifying and making a medical expert. She's simply guessing on her 5 senses, which is how she sounded, how Genesis sounded over the phone.
Okay.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
Sure. One more time.
If the witness is simply guessing, then it is more prejudicial than probative to have this witness just guess what state of being Genesis was at the time. If that's the case, then I would move my objection to more prejudicial than probative. But like I said, Your Honor, she simply doesn't have the information to be able to give us this opinion.
Okay. What probative information does it give us to be drunk, Attorney Stringer?
We're not offering this information. The witness is just saying how Genesis sounded to her and why she didn't take this message necessarily serious. And the only reason why I bring Exhibit 8 up is only if it's mentioned on cross that we get it talked about beforehand. So the contents of this message, Ms. Martini is saying that she did not take it seriously because she thought or assumed that Genesis was not in the right state of mind based on how she heard. She's not directly saying she was drunk. She's saying she assumed she was.
Okay, I think I've heard enough at this point. I am going to overrule the objection that led from lack of personal knowledge to 701 to 403. I am going to give the jury just a limiting statement, though, stating that Mr. Martini is not a expert in the field and did not know the level of intoxication. This is simply how she perceived Genesis on that day, and nothing further. But I am going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor. Now, Ms. Martini, did you do anything to mend your relationship with Genesis?
Of course. I mean, I did everything I could think of. I paid the venue fees. I even hosted the wedding and the wedding rehearsal at my estate, so Casey and Genesis wouldn't have to pay for any of it. I mean, I paid a total of, $22,280. I even hired the best wedding planner and caterer. And again, none of it stuck. That's when an idea came to me the night before the rehearsal dinner about how I could mend my relationship with Genesis.
What was this idea?
I had the idea of giving him what I thought would be a kind gesture, which was a bottle of wine.
Oh, what is this wine that you're referring to?
It was the Cara wine. I made it way back in 2018. It's actually named after my sister who passed away from cancer a few years ago. I was trying to perfect it so it could be one of our best sellers at Peony Estate.
So where was the Cara wine being stored at Peony Estates?
In a bottling shelf at Peony Estates.
Who has access to this bottling shelf?
Myself, as well as every single staff member of Peony Estates.
Now, Ms. Martini, I want to move to the night of the rehearsal, which is June 7, 2019. Can you tell me when you decided to leave the rehearsal?
Around 10:30.
And what happened after that?
Well, around 2:30, I'd overheard that someone got hospitalized. Someone was rushed to the hospital. I assumed it was Genesis because I saw him heavily drunk and because he was nowhere to be found.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, sorry, I could barely hear the objection. I'm sorry about that. On what grounds?
On hearsay, Your Honor, the witness said that she overheard something that would be an out-of-court statement, assumably being used to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
All right, Attorney Stringer, how is this not hearsay? Or why is it an exception to hearsay?
Ms. Martini stated that she received news, so there's no out-of-court statement present. And this is also used to show her subsequent actions to what she heard. And that's the only reason why I'm using this knowledge. In my next question, she has actions that prompted her based on what she heard to do something else.
I'll let Ms. Trumbull respond, but before, can we clarify what the quote is?
All Ms. Martini said was that she received news that someone from the estate got rushed to the hospital.
Your Honor, specifically what I heard was that she said that she overheard that someone had been rushed to the hospital from Peony Estates. So yes, that the statement itself is that someone was rushed to the hospital from Peony Estates, but the witness specifically said that she overheard that.
It's a close one, but I think that subsequent actions is an appropriate response because, you know, she's going to take action based on hearing that someone got rushed to the hospital. I am going to give the jury a truth limiting statement, though, saying that, you know, the statement of this person being sent to the hospital is not being offered for truth of the matter. There's no true substance in that statement. Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Martini, what did you do after you received that news?
After I received this news, I headed to Genesis' room to see if it was really him or not. That's when I saw the Cara wine bottle completely empty on the floor.
Now, Ms. Martini, what happened the morning of June 8th, 2019?
That's when I'd figured out that was really Genesis who got hospitalized.
And how did you react to this news?
Initially, I thought he just got sick because of alcohol poisoning. And it was, yeah, my heart really went out for Casey that day.
Now, Ms. Martini, did you alter the wine in any way before giving it to Genesis?
No, I did not.
Did you poison the wine that you gave to Genesis?
No, I would never do such a thing.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Trumbull, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Harper, your daughter is Casey Soto.
Yes.
And you obviously want the best for her.
Of course, she's my only daughter.
She's the love of your life.
Yes.
The light of your life, I'm sorry.
Yes, I mean, that's a part being a mother.
And on direct examination, you said that you tried to give her nothing but the best.
Of course, like any mother would.
Well, you didn't think that Genesis was the best for Casey, did you?
No, like I said, she wasn't really around herself around him.
And then you found out that Casey was engaged.
Yes, I did.
And she was engaged to Genesis?
Yes.
You had a difficult relationship with Genesis, didn't you?
Yes, like I said, nothing with Genesis ever stuck, so it was hard to connect to him.
You and Genesis argued a lot.
Yes, here and there.
Genesis was also critical of your winery, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was picky about a few things.
Now, you started this winery by yourself.
Yes, I did.
The winery is how you make money.
Yes,
You're very proud of your winery.
of course. I also employee and help feed so many families.
So understandably, it would hurt when Genesis would be critical of that thing you were so proud of.
Yes, it was, but I mean, criticism is such a common thing. I took it again with a grain of salt. Genesis was just a very picky guy.
Now, your disagreement over your winery wasn't the only problem that you had with Genesis, was it?
I mean, we've had a little bumps here and there with Genesis.
You didn't think that Genesis was right for Casey?
No, like I said, that one time she got alcohol poisoning really rubbed me the wrong way.
Now, I want to make perfectly clear about what's happening with this alcohol poisoning. Now, you never saw or heard Genesis be emotionally abusive to Casey.
No, not to my knowledge, but again, we didn't really hang out a lot, like I said, with Genesis and Casey, so I don't really know what happens behind the scenes. As long as Casey was happy, I was happy for her.
Ms. Martini, that's a yes to my question that you never saw Genesis be emotionally abusive to Casey.
No, that's out of the scope of my knowledge. I'm not really sure what happened behind the scenes. I just hope that Casey was always happy. That's all that mattered.
Again, I'm going to redirect you back to my question, which was that you never saw or heard Genesis be emotionally abusive to Casey.
No, I didn't. I've never heard such a thing.
And you ever also never saw or heard Genesis manipulate Casey, did you?
No, I mean, I would hope not. Casey has not told me anything like that, but again, I don't know what happens behind the scenes between them. We barely got to hang out together.
Ms. Martini, again, I'm going to redirect you back to my question. I'm only asking you about what you personally saw and heard. You never saw or heard Genesis be manipulative to Casey, did you?
Like I said, no, I'm not really sure, and I'd hope nothing like that ever happened.
And yet, you still didn't think that Genesis was right for Casey, did you?
No, I personally didn't think he wasn't, but like I said, maybe it was a mother's intuition.
Now, you thought that your daughter had no flaws, isn't that right?
Well, like I said, Casey was my little protege. I made sure to raise her with the best of manners. As long as she respected people, that's all that mattered.
Ms. Martini, if we could stick to a simple yes or no question to answer to my questions, you thought your daughter had no flaws, isn't that correct?
Yes, sorry, I could talk about Casey all day. Casey was a great daughter.
Now, the only flaw that you saw that Casey had was her relationship to Genesis.
Yes, like I said, I didn't think Genesis was right for Casey, but as long as she was happy, I couldn't say much.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to bring to the court's attention Exhibit 24.
All right, 24 has not been entered into evidence, so we're going to presume that the jury has not seen it, but pull it up for identification and we'll start from there.
Now, Ms. Martini, this is a note that you wrote to Genesis, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
That's your handwriting.
Yes.
You wrote all of those words on that paper.
Yes.
Your Honor, and it doesn't appear to have been changed or altered in any way.
No, I don't believe it has.
This is that exact same note that you wrote.
Yes, it's the same one.
Your Honor, at this time, I move to enter Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor, I object under Rule of Evidence 403 that this evidence is more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard?
Sure. For 403, let's really stick to what's prejudicial, what's probative. You may be heard.
This evidence is prejudicial because it can arouse emotions of the jury, such as bias and hostility towards my witness. There is much more probative evidence in this case that the plaintiff can choose to use, and with emotions being aroused, that could create an impartial verdict, which is unfair to my client.
All right, response?
Yes, Your Honor, there's no prejudicial value to this at all. So the witness's own words, but the probative value is extreme. If you can take a look at the document, I think it's pretty clear why the probative value is so high in this case. It's clearly more probative than it is prejudicial. Additionally, it must be substantially more prejudicial than it is probative, and this note clearly does not meet that bar.
All right, yeah, I agree with Attorney Trumbull. It's a very high bar for 403. It needs to be substantially more prejudicial than a probative value that might have, given the fact that the relationships and the day of the wedding all seem to be a factor in motive for today's trial. Whether or not this proves it or not, I'm not saying, but I am going to let it in.
That's wrong. Should we assume that this document has been published to the jury and tendered to the bench?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Martini, on this document, you say that unless Genesis takes the $300,000 that you offered her, that you were going to take Genesis out of the picture the hard way.
Yes, I did write that. I actually wrote this note right next to Casey when she got hospitalized with alcohol poisoning. I was very angry with Genesis, and I just wrote it out of, anger and sadness that Casey got alcohol poisoning that day.
Thank you for that explanation, Ms. Martini, but you did say that you would take Genesis out of the picture the hard way unless Genesis left. Isn't that correct?
Yes, like I said, that was out of anger because Casey had gotten alcohol poisoning that day, and it broke my heart.
Now, you said that Genesis had until the 7th to choose. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I did write that.
Now, the rehearsal dinner was on July 7th. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. If we could take down Exhibit 24. Now, I want to talk about specifically what you did on July 27th, or I'm sorry, July 7th. You left the rehearsal dinner at 10:30, isn't that right?
Yes, 10:30 p.m.
And at around 2:30, you got a call that someone was in a coma.
Yes, someone was hospitalized.
Yes, and you immediately assumed that that was Genesis?
Yes, like I said, he was nowhere to be found at the party, and I thought it was him.
Even before looking for Genesis, you assumed that it was him?
Yes, since everyone was looking for the groom and he wasn't there, I just assumed it was him.
Now, your first response was to go to Genesis' room, isn't that correct?
Yes, I wanted to see if he cooped himself up there this entire time when he was missing, and again, I didn't find him there.
You thought that Genesis could be in a coma, but you didn't tell Casey that, did you?
No, I mean, at that point, I didn't know if it was really Genesis, and like I said, I didn't want to scare Casey. She already had so much pressure on her. It was her wedding week.
Instead, you went to Genesis' room and you opened that door, isn't that right?
Yes.
You walked in the room.
Yes.
You saw a bottle of car wine on the ground.
Yes, empty bottle.
Yes, it was empty. And
yes.
And so you picked up that bottle of wine.
Yes.
You ripped off your label.
Yes.
And you walked that bottle of wine out the door.
Yes. I already, at that point, I already assumed that Genesis got alcohol poisoning. So I just ripped the bottle. I mean, I threw away the trash, basically. The hotel room was a hot mess. I just cleaned up the mess.
You only cleaned up that bottle of car wine, isn't that right?
Yes. The clothes were scattered everywhere, but I did pick up a few other things.
And then you threw that bottle of your car wine in the dumpster.
I threw it in the trash, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Sorry, Your Honor, your connection went bad a little bit, but yes, brief redirect.
All right.
Okay. Ms. Martini, can you explain why you ripped off the label on the Cara wine bottle?
Yes. Again, like I said, because I assumed Genesis got hospitalized for alcohol poisoning, I didn't want Cara to be blamed for it since it was supposed to be our bestseller. So I just, again, like I said, I cleaned up the mess.
And where is the dumpster located? Where was the dumpster that you threw the wine at located?
It was at my estate.
And did you ever inform Casey about Genesis's passing?
That was a really hard moment for Casey, but I was there for her. We all together heard the news that Genesis had passed away, and like I said, my heart broke for her.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross based on that?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Martini, you are as party representative here for the entirety of the trial, but thank you for your testimony. You can certainly stay present for the rest of the trial.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, defense counsel, do you have any more evidence to present in today's case?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stands, please.
All right, Dr. Cannon, you have already been sworn in, and defense, you may proceed with direct examination whenever you are ready.
Hi, Dr. Cannon. How are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm good. Could you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Most certainly. The name's Dr. Roger Cannon. I work as an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting Incorporated. I've consulted on many matters for clients regarding medicine, pharmacology, and toxicology.
What types of cases are you familiar with, Dr. Cannon?
Oh, numerous, civil and criminal, regarding murder, medical malpractice, negligence, even animal abuse. I have clients rich, poor, even occasionally the furry variety. I actually chose my career in consulting because it lets me practice my passion for toxicology. As a young boy, my beloved award-winning Schnauzer Rufus was poisoned by antifreeze. This is what fueled my passion for toxicology.
My apologies for your dog's passing, Dr. Cannon, but I have to ask, were you compensated for your work in this case?
Yes, my company charges a $50,000 flat rate for all consultations.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Cannon, can you tell us a little bit more about your education?
Yes, most certainly. I got my bachelor's in chemistry from Ohio State in 1990 with honors, and my medical degree with an emphasis in toxicology from Harvard Medical School in 1996, summa cum laude.
Now, outside of consulting, what other medical experience do you have?
Oh, I've practiced medicine for like 23 years or more now. I was the head of toxicology at Mass General Hospital for 3 years, and I was a professor right here in Midlands Medical School. I find the upkeep of scientific education very important, and I've maintained 5 different medical licenses in 5 different states.
Are you affiliated with any professional organizations?
Oh yes, I have about 9 affiliations within the medical and legal communities. I'm currently president of the Society of Professional Toxicologists.
Do you have any publications within the field of toxicology?
Yes, I have. Oh, gosh, if I had to say, I'd say around 50 in medicine, toxicology, and treatments. More dear to my heart, I run a personal blog called Rufus DM, dedicated to my Schnauzer, about the newest and most innovative research done around the world regarding toxicology. Education never stops.
Dr. Cannon, could you explain to the jury why you are here today?
I was asked to assess the results of Dr. Kwan in regards to the death of Genesis Petrillo.
What documents have you reviewed for your evaluation?
I have reviewed the toxicology chart, the death certificate, the alcohol impairment chart, the reports from Dr. Kwan, and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
And are the methods you used to complete your evaluation widely accepted within your field?
Oh yes, most certainly. Even without access to the body, it's common to base my knowledge upon documents provided to me. That's what the whole field of consulting is based upon.
And Dr. Cannon, describe to the jury your understanding of the events surrounding Genesis Petrillo's death.
Yes, on June 8th, 2019, the unfortunate events occurred. So Genesis was brought into the ER. Dr. Kwan ordered and administered all the tests, and Dr. Kwan also ruled on the chain of events that led to the death being from organophosphate.
What are some of the symptoms Dr. Kwan notes in his report?
That the patient was unable to walk or speak, the patient was vomiting, and the patient was experiencing incontinence.
Now, what did you note about Dr. Kwan's report?
I noted that his final conclusion might be inconsistent with the chain of events leading up to the death. There was no mention of any testing or autopsy after the death. There was no mention of medical history, prescription history, which is very important because a lot of medicines you cannot mix with alcohol. That's where there are big labels that say, do not mix with alcohol. These were never accounted for.
Could you explain to the jury, what is blood alcohol content?
The percent of blood that is concentrated with alcohol. In layman's terms, how much alcohol is inside you.
Now, why is that important here in this case?
It's very important because blood alcohol content is constantly fluctuating, and it is very difficult to determine blood alcohol content, which is just one factor in the equation of alcohol intoxication. Alcohol intoxication correlates to multiple important factors that a medical professional must never overlook. The amount of alcohol consumed, which was unknown, the rate of consumption, which was unknown, the potency of the drinks, which was unknown, the body weight in regards to the metabolic rate of the consumer, which was unknown, the medical history and other medicines consumed, which was unknown, when the consumer's peak BAC, blood alcohol content, was, which was unknown. From this exhibit, nobody can determine a true representation of not only Genesis's blood alcohol content, but the state of alcohol intoxication, which truly matters more in this case.
Dr. Cannon, could you explain what exactly is peak BAC?
Yes, it's a point in which the amount of alcohol in a person's bloodstream is at its highest. Peak BAC is heavily dependent on similar variables: number of drinks, potency of drinks, and time frame of which they were consumed.
Why does all this concern you in Dr. Kwan's medical conclusion?
Given only one BAC reading that night and all the numerous unknowns, there's no way to determine anything indefinitely.
Who prepared the death certificate?
Dr. Kwan.
Was there any reference in the death certificate regarding BAC?
Nope.
Why does this matter?
Oh, as a medical professional, it is protocol to consider all possible alternatives before giving a final conclusion. Dr. Kwan only considered that the ingestion of organophosphate pesticide led to respiratory failure, leading to death, not only ruling out the possibility of alcohol and all other factors. But the information I'm relaying to you is that there were too many unknowns to say anything indefinitely.
Can you tell us about the different levels of alcohol impairment?
Yes, I can do this best by Exhibit 23.
Your Honor, permission to show Exhibit 23. After shown, we will follow the correct steps to have it admitted into evidence.
Sure. And at this time, the jury will not be able to see Exhibit 23.
Mr. Hammer, could you please present Exhibit 23? Thank you. Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel Exhibit 23. Let the record also reflect that I'm showing the witness Exhibit 23. Could you please identify the document that you're seeing, Dr. Cannon?
Yes, this is the alcohol impairment chart that the doctors of Midlands abide by.
And is it a fair and accurate copy as you remember it to be?
Indeed it is.
Thank you. Now, referring to Exhibit 23, what are the symptoms of a blood alcohol content, or BAC, of 0.26%?
Objection. Facts not in evidence.
Yeah, Counselor, you got to enter this into evidence before going into the details.
My apologies. Defense would like to enter Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection.
Now, referring to
Right.
Exhibit 23.
We'll admit that.
I didn't hear you.
I said submitted.
Dr. Cannon, referring to Exhibit 23 again, what are the symptoms of a blood alcohol content of 0.26% and over?
A typical person would experience the inability to walk or stand, vomiting, incontinence, very similar to what Genesis was experiencing.
What about a blood alcohol content of 0.35% and over?
Ooh, 0.35. Those are life-threatening, such as coma, respiratory paralysis.
Dr. Cannon, what is your conclusion regarding Genesis suffering from something other than organophosphate, like alcohol poisoning?
There is a very strong probability that the BAC was higher than 0.16 at some point throughout the night. Given the variability with BAC and alcohol intoxication due to numerous factors that were never accounted for or tested, we cannot rule that organophosphate was the sole contributor to a respiratory paralysis. Genesis's true BAC is uncertain. The reports by Dr. Kwan were superficial and incomplete. In layman's terms, not done properly, not conducted properly. There is not enough evidence to tip the scales towards pesticides being the sole cause of Genesis's death, given the enormous weights of all the unknowns.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Cannon. No further question, Your Honor. And Mr. Harmer, could you please remove the exhibit from the screen? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Fletcher. Ms. Cameron, your witness.
I'd like to start by talking about you and Dr. Kwan's conclusions. You're aware that Dr. Kwan determined that the cause of death was first respiratory arrest.
Yes.
Then he determined that the cause of respiratory arrest was pesticide poisoning.
Yes, those are what Dr. Kwan concluded.
Lastly, he determined that the most likely cause of poisoning was from the wine bottle.
Yes.
And you concluded that Genesis most likely died from respiratory arrest.
Yes.
And the most likely cause of the respiratory arrest was pesticide poisoning.
No, let me specify here. I'm sorry, please let me differentiate. What I said was most likely, but given the data obtained, what I'm trying to relay is that there was very little data. So the weight of the unknowns is heavier than just the most likely.
But ultimately, in your report, you determined that the most likely cause of death, most likely cause of the respiratory arrest was from pesticide poisoning.
Let me differentiate, most likely given the data, but the data was not sufficient.
So that's a yes to my question.
It's a hard question to answer in my opinion, but I guess I'd have to say yes.
And the most likely cause of pesticide, and you determined the most likely cause of the pesticide poisoning was from the wine bottle, correct?
Correct.
And you determined that none of the alternatives conclusions you came to were more likely than respiratory arrest caused by pesticide poisoning.
I never concluded that, no. I said that there were many possibilities that were never accounted for in my research.
But you concluded that your four alternatives were the most likely. You concluded that none of your four alternatives were more likely than death by respiratory arrest caused by pesticide poisoning.
I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question?
You determined that the most likely cause of death was respiratory arrest caused by pesticide poisoning, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
I haven't heard a clear answer on it, so I'm going to overrule.
Oh, sorry, my bad. So you determined that none of your four alternatives were more likely than death by respiratory arrest caused by pesticide poisoning, correct?
I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, but plaintiff has reached their cross time.
Your Honor, I have that we have around 35 more seconds.
I have you at 2:35. I can read down my times from your crosses.
Let's split down the middle. Questions, call it done.
You determined that none of your four alternatives were more likely than respiratory arrest caused by pesticide poisoning, correct?
Not correct. I think there are multiple possibilities that were not considered.
No further questions.
Thank you for that. Glad we could get that time thing settled too. Ms. Fletcher, do you have any redirect?
No, Your Honor. All I ask is that Dr. Cannon can step down. Yeah.
Dr. Cannon, the court thanks you for your time and you are excused. You're welcome. Defense, do you have any more evidence to present today?
No, Your Honor.
All right. No witnesses, no evidence. Does the defense rest?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense rests.
All right. Maybe more of a question for the closers, but how much time do you want?
Your Honor, could we have 10 minutes?
Any objections from the defense?
I'm fine. I'm fine with just 7, but 10 is fine.
All right, we will take 10. I used to close, so I know the issues. We're going to take 10.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. If someone from the plaintiff and from the defense's side can let me know when both sides are ready to proceed, we can get going.
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. All right, and plaintiff appears to be ready as well. We will move into closing arguments. Similar to openings, I'll remind people to utilize the speaker view during the opening and closing arguments. All right, Ms. Trumbull, you may proceed.
Your Honor, before I proceed, can my time checker confirm with defense about how much time I have remaining?
Sure, why don't we say or figure out how much time we have for both sides just to make sure we're consistent. We don't want anyone prematurely cutting off.
Yes, Your Honor.
I have for the plaintiff 7 minutes and 12 seconds left for her speech, and for the defense, I have 8 minutes and 44 seconds.
Give me 1 second while I check. How long do you have for defense?
8 minutes and 44 seconds.
And what did you clock opening as? Was it 3 minutes and 12 seconds?
Excuse me?
For opening, did you get our opening as 3 minutes and 12 seconds?
I have it as 3 minutes and 16 seconds, but I could be a little bit off.
Okay.
Let's say 3:12 and we'll be liberal on both sides. Do we agree that the plaintiff time is correct?
4:48. Yes, plaintiff is correct, and being liberal with defense, that is correct too.
All right. Ms. Trumbull, the floor is yours. If you want to retain any time for rebuttal, feel free to do so. Obviously, you don't need to specify.
Thank you, Your Honor. Harper Martini picked her poison. Members of the jury, now that we have completed today's trial, you know exactly what that means. At the beginning of today's trial, my co-counsel Lexi Cobbs came before you and she told you a story. Now, at the time, it may have seemed just like a fairy tale, but ladies and gentlemen of the jury, now you know the facts that support that story. On June 8th, 2019, the defendant, Harper Martini, had a problem. She was about to lose her only daughter. Not only was she losing her to France, but she was also losing her to someone else, Genesis Petrillo. And the last day the defendant had to do something about that was the day they would be together forever. The day before they would be together forever, June 7th, 2019. Time after time leading up to that date, Harper had done everything she could to destroy that relationship. She had talked to Casey, she had bribed Genesis, she had told everyone she could about how much she hated Genesis. And she reached the point where she had to pick her poison to get Genesis out of the picture. And as you heard today, it was perfectly set up for her to do so. The rehearsal dinner was at her venue. They were drinking her wine, and the poison, the pesticide, was readily accessible. And that's exactly what she did. She gave a poisoned bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo that led to his death. The law says that we have to show you that it is more likely than not that Harper put the poison in the wine with the intent to harm Genesis. If the evidence just goes 51%, then we win our case. But we wanted to ensure that when you rule that Harper had committed battery, that you had all of the evidence. And we have shown that she put the poison in the wine in order to harm Genesis. We showed you that not only was there pesticide on the property, but the defendant knew it would be dangerous. Mr. O'Keefe told you that he had informed Harper that pesticides could get in the wine and they could kill. And Harper knew and she understood that. So when she decided to kill Genesis, She knew which poison to pick. We're going to walk through all the evidence that you heard today, and in doing so, I'm going to break it down into 3 separate questions. How did Genesis die? When did the pesticide get into the wine? And why did Harper poison Genesis? Now, first, how did Genesis die? We all agreed that when Genesis arrived at the rehearsal dinner, Genesis was healthy. But in a matter of hours, Genesis went from a healthy person to dead. Well, to unfold this fairy tale that turned tragic, Dr. Kwan looked to the victim's blood. And in that blood, Dr. Kwan identified a pesticide. And we heard from Ms. Arnold that that pesticide is the same pesticide that Peony Estates regularly uses. And it was on the residence on June 7th, 2019. And it's the same pesticide that was found in the bottle of Clara wine that Genesis drank that night. Now, the second question is, how did the poison get into the wine? Now, to answer that, Mr. Adkins O'Keefe came before you and explained to you the bottling process that Peony Estates undergoes. And he told you that it must have happened sometime between the barreling process and the bottling process. And we know this because he tested the wine before it was bottled and found that there was no pesticides in that wine. But in the bottle of Clara wine that was found after Genesis died, there was an extremely high level of pesticides, enough to kill. Now, specifically, when did this poison get into the wine? You heard Miss Arnold come before you and tell you about the scene that she saw of Harper in the kitchen with the bottle of wine and the pesticides. And Harper and Miss Arnold told you that at that time, she heard Harper say that she had this pesticides in order to kill pests like Genesis. Now, why would Harper want to poison Genesis? And in Exhibit 8, when you have a chance to go back and deliberate, you'll be able to look at this exhibit more fully. And in that, you'll be able to see that Genesis Petrillo told the defendant that he was going to be taking her daughter to France. Not only was he taking her to France, but that she would never get to see her daughter or her grandchildren ever again. And that hurt Miss Martini. And so in order to keep her daughter here, in order to prevent this plan from happening, she knew that her last resort, the only thing she had left was to get Genesis out of the picture. Now, you also heard Miss Arnold explain to you that Harper told multiple people that this bottle was special for Genesis and that Genesis should drink it alone. It was just for him. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, now that you have heard all the evidence and seen all the facts, it is clear that the defendant picked her poison. And the poison that she picked was her winery's pesticide. And she chose to put that pesticide in Genesis Petrillo's wine in order to get him out of the picture and away from her daughter. The facts are clear. Find Harper Martini liable for battery. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Trumbull. Defense, your closing.
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Now, no one can deny that an unfortunate tragedy took place the morning of June 8, 2019. Genesis Petrillo's family lost their child on what was supposed to be one of the biggest days of his life. Casey Soto lost her fiance the morning of the wedding. And losses like this should simply never happen. And everyone here wishes that instead of going through this trial, that Genesis was still here with us today. And when tragedies like this occur, it's human instinct to try to find answers. Assigning blame to someone is understandable because families just want peace and closure. But in a hurried effort to try to find logic and reason as to why a loved one passed, people tend to overlook the facts. And we see that happening today where the opposing party is being too quick to condemn Harper Martini. Because the truth is, when you look at the facts presented during today's case, one fact remains unchanged, that Harper is not liable for the death of Genesis Petrillo. Now, the plaintiff has filed a claim of battery against Harper, and I want to highlight what that means to you. It means that they have to prove that Harper intentionally mixed the pesticides inside the Clara wine and that Harper acted with intent to cause harm to Genesis. And now I want you, the jury, to focus on that word, intent, because it's very important. Intention is defined as a plan, a goal. And for the plaintiff to meet their burden of proof today, they have to prove that Harper planned to poison Genesis all along. And they have failed to do that because everything they presented today has been under circumstantial evidence. Because the Carol wine that Harper gifted to Genesis was made all the way back in 2018, meaning that it was in existence a whole year before the wedding. Harper came up with the idea to give the wine to Genesis the night before the rehearsal. So it wasn't planned. It was a last-minute afterthought. So now that gives you a timeline to start working with. Harper didn't poison the wine a year before the wedding because she had no reason to do so. So that leaves the day before the wedding rehearsal as her only window of opportunity. So how could Harper mix the pesticide in the wine, reseal the bottle in a short window of time and go undetected? There were multiple people moving around the estates during the day of the rehearsal. Sam Arnold testified that there are numerous guests and staff at the estates regularly. And everybody knows Harper's face. She's the owner of the estates. She's the face of her brand. Wouldn't someone have seen her do it? Because the truth is, you've heard from several witnesses today, and none of them testified to seeing Harper tamper with the wine. Sam Arnold took the stand and said he did not see Harper Martini open the wine bottle minutes before he presented it to Genesis. In fact, he stated that he could not confirm if the canister was full or not. And that leads to another question that must be asked, and I know you want the answer to. How did pesticides end up in the wine in the first place? Well, we know that Riley Atkins O'Keefe stated that there were pesticides at the estates. But we know that. That doesn't prove anything. This case is not about pesticide storage. It's about if Harper intentionally put the pesticides in the wine. And Riley Atkins O'Keefe couldn't tell you if Harper tampered with the wine. And we know from Harper that all of her employees had access to the bottling area where the wine was being stored. And since people were too quick to condemn Harper, they didn't investigate anyone else who had access to this room. The employees could have mistakenly stored the pesticides, but that was never looked into because the sole blame is on Harper. Does it make sense to you that multiple people have access to this area, but only one person was investigated? Wouldn't you want to turn every rock and explore every avenue to figure out why this happened to Genesis? But they didn't do it because what we have is an incomplete investigation. Now, did Genesis and Harper have their differences? Yes, they did. There is no denying that. And I'm sure you, the Hurry, have heard the testimonies from people saying that Harper said Genesis is so selfish and immature, or this pesticide is to kill pests like Genesis. But think about that known quote, actions speak louder than words. It's a little old school, but it still holds a lot of truth to it and a lot of truth during this trial today. So let's take a look at Harper's actions rather than words she spoke out of mere emotion. Harper hired the best wedding planner and the best food caterer for the wedding. She moved the wedding to her estates so that the newlyweds didn't have to pay anything. She paid for the wedding completely out of pocket. She tried to reach out to Genesis on multiple occasions to mend their relationship. She exerted so much time and resources into this wedding. Why would she do this knowing the wedding was never going to happen? Does this seem like the actions of a liable individual? Harper informed Casey about Genesis's passing. She didn't hide the fact. Harper disposed of the Carol wine at a dumpster at Peony Estate, somewhere that was easily found. She didn't try to conceal it. She didn't try to hide it somewhere else. Does that seem like the actions of a liable person? And now, for any offense to be committed, a motive must be present. And for Harper to have a motive for poisoning Genesis, she must benefit from her death in some way. And I want you to think if the plaintiff proved this to you today. They did not bring you concrete evidence about Harper and Genesis's relationship. The only thing Sam Arnold could tell you is that Harper wanted Casey to marry someone other than Genesis. So the plaintiff has tried to prove that a parent simply not liking their child's soon-to-be spouse, which is quite common nowadays, is enough for Harper to poison Genesis. But think about how Harper has been affected due to this tragedy. Harper's business at Peony Estates, a business she created herself, is on the verge of shutting down. She went from being the #1 winery in Midlands to becoming the center of this battery case today. And Blair Osborne testified that she is no longer doing business with Harper, and their partnership was an essential asset to Peony Estates. So the successful reputation that Harper has built by herself is tarnished. Ladies and gentlemen, the reward does not outweigh the risk. And for Harper to intentionally poison Genesis, it meant that she risked losing everything she had, everything she ever loved. And as I said earlier, losses like this should simply never happen. And the death of someone should not be broken down into a science, but unfortunately it is needed today so that justice can occur. Dr. Kwan concluded that Genesis's blood alcohol concentration was 0.16% the night Genesis was brought in the hospital. However, Dr. Kwan failed to include Genesis's prior medical issues, underlying health issues, and alcohol intake in his report. And we also know from Dr. Cannon that it is close to impossible to know Genesis's true BAC, because BAC is not constant, it fluctuates, and it depends solely on how much a person has drank, meaning Genesis's BAC could have been higher than 0.16%. And the fact is, no one knows how much alcohol Genesis consumed that night. And Harper testified that when she went up to Genesis's room to find him, the Carolina was completely empty. Harper herself even thought that Genesis passed from alcohol poisoning when she found out the news. So knowing that Genesis ordered more alcoholic drinks and drank a whole bottle of wine in one sitting, alcohol poisoning cannot be ruled out. Even though it is highly unlikely, does not mean it's not a possibility. So what do we have here overall? We have an inconsistent timeline. How did Harper manage to poison the wine just the day before the rehearsal with so much people around her? We have a doctor that didn't think about all the facts, that disregarded many other options in his report. And ultimately, we have a flawed investigation. We, the defense, asked you to think about all these facts and ask yourself, did the witnesses the plaintiff provided give you enough reason to believe that what happened to Genesis was an intentional act? Use these facts and find Harper Martini not liable for the death of Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Stringer. Ms. Trumbull, rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel just came up here and she gave you a false idea of what it means to have intent. Now, we don't have to prove that Harper had planned this years in advance. All we have to prove is at the time that Harper put that pesticide in the wine, she intended to cause harm to Genesis Petrillo, and we did that today. Your Honor, opposing counsel also told you that we should look at Harper's actions and not just her words, and I agree. Let's look at her actions. She bribed Genesis Petrillo with $300,000 to get out of her daughter's life. And we can't just look at her actions. We can't ignore her words. She said that she had that pesticide in order to kill pests like Genesis. She threatened to take Genesis out of the picture the hard way. It's clear that she had the motive. She had the most to lose by her daughter marrying this man. She had the easiest access to the pesticide and the most control over the situation at her winery. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is clear that Harper Martini intended to poison Genesis with that pesticide in the bottle of wine on June 7th, 2019. Find Harper liable for battery. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. With that, we are going to call to a close the case of the estate of Petrillo versus Harper Martini and Peony Estates. My fellow judge and I will finish the scoring of our ballots, and once we have both submitted those, we need to wait for confirmation from Elliot Riches in the tab room. Once we have that confirmation, we can provide comments. In the meantime, please hold tight. Additionally, for Ms. Costner, my second judge, please do let me know once you submit your ballot.
Hey, Christian, for some reason, I'm not finding a submit button.
So at the bottom of the ballot, where it says, please write the word submit.
Oh, okay. I
And
kept
then,
flipping.
yeah, and then below it, you need to physically write the word yes to confirm.
Okay. Okay, I've got.
All right, I will let the tab room know that we have both submitted.
No, it's, I'm sorry. I see. Wait a minute. There's a whole, okay. I think I've got it now.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
It's new for sure.
It is. I emailed Elliot. The one thing I would say for us old dinosaur attorneys would be to maybe offer a practice session so that we could actually do this hands-on for a few minutes. Then I would have been so much more comfortable as a presiding judge, just, having done it, because reading it is a little bit different than actually doing it. And I don't want to screw it up for these, students who have worked so hard.
Yeah, well, Elliot did say that it went through for both of us and we are
Yay.
confirmed and able to get comments. So everyone should feel free to put their videos on so we can see your smiling faces. And I will let Ms. Costner start first, just because she has had to be so quiet during this process, and I'm tired of talking.
Well, and I'm not going to keep you guys long. I know just a couple of comments. You guys did a great job. Let me just say that first. And I always continue to be so impressed by law students and how hard you guys work. And it's obvious to me how much preparation went into it. The highlights for me in this trial, I would say, were the closing arguments. I just thought you both did a really great job arguing the case. They were compelling. You guys worked in the law, you worked in the facts, and I was just very impressed. I was impressed throughout, but I just thought the closing arguments were really stellar. And so I just congratulate you all on your hard work. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Ms. Costner, can you take an opportunity to introduce yourself? Just tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a solo practitioner here in Winston-Salem. Went to Wake undergrad and to law school there. I practice primarily in the area of criminal defense. And so I try cases for a living. Basically, I also teach as an adjunct. I teach trial practice at Wake Forest 1 semester a year. But the Zoom stuff is a whole new world for me and for most of us who are practicing law. So this is, and how that's going to look with courts and hearings and stuff is going to be really interesting. I really hope one day in the very near future, though, I will get to see students in an actual mock courtroom instead of on Zoom. But I think, you all handled everything really well. I've been doing this for a long time, 32 years, but only 6 months with Zoom. So, and not in a court. I've not had a Zoom hearing yet. So most of anything I've done with Zoom has been meetings or something like that. I've actually been in court a few times over the summer, but not much. It's pretty much ground to a halt in many ways.
Oh, I was muted. Thank you so much for that. It was a pleasure serving alongside you. My name is Christian Zulia. I was an AMTA competitor for all 4 years of my time at Wake Forest University. They were able to rope me in here for all 4 rounds. Apparently, this was like the last. This was the only round that I was like able to judge because I had so many conflicts by the end of it. But I graduated last year, and I'm currently a paralegal in estate planning. Some riveting stuff if people are interested in trusts and wills. Really, the only thing that I would have any legal knowledge for this case is maybe the probate of whatever happens with the estate of Genesis Petrillo. But besides that, I really know nothing other than the general mock trialistness. I did take some Google form comments on there. I also include my email. So if you want to reach out to me via email to ask anything further, that'll be on there. I took 6 kind of broad notes, but each of them are on different things. The first one is on statements. For openings, I was never able to give an opening in mock trial. I was never able to, just because it's not something that I was good at. And I think the reason is that I wasn't able to paint a picture very clearly. And I think that, both of you did a very good job of intriguing me and really getting to me. For the defense, plaintiff just told you a story, and I wrote that down in quotes, and I said the number of times that I've said those words. For plaintiff, I really like that you're focusing on the poison. The fairy tale thing, less so. I thought that was really unique, though, and I think that to hone on it, I really would be interested in maybe a theme that is completely follow the poison, because if you do something where it's like follow the poison from the bottle to the wine, to the table, to the glass, to the mouth, and go from there. I think that would be a really interesting thing. But yeah, just more of a story would be nice to know exactly what's going on and what's transpiring. Then next would be for the closings. I thought very good. The only comment I had was that I thought this case relies on a lot of circumstantial evidence. No one saw anyone put poison into the wine glass or the wine bottle or anything like that. So I think that, defense closer, you did a wonderful job, a very good tone. I think for you to really harp on the fact that they are basing, this very grave accusation on nothing but assumptions would be really important. And so I would do, something of the sort of, they want you to assume this. They want you to assume that. They even want you to assume this. But members of the jury, assumption on top of assumption is not a preponderance of the evidence. Something like that. Then I think biggest overall comment is that we got to study up on case law and rules of evidence. I think both sides had a little bit of a tricky time with it. Every time that I noted something specific, I did write a note of whether I thought you handled an objection well or if there were areas to improve. Another point, the wine brand called Cara Wines after Cara. I thought that was a great story. I don't know if that's in the affidavit or not. Either way, I think it's great. The issue is that people kept pronouncing it differently. Some people called it Cara, some people called it Cara. Everyone's, there's all of these issues with AMTA that always happens. First tournament last year, people couldn't decide how they wanted to pronounce Lecron. The year before, was it Villafana, Viafania? All AMTA always does this. So just as a team, come together, agree on the way you want to say it. And also just remember that, if the defendant is saying, oh, it's called Cara Wine because Cara was my sister who's now dead, call it Cara because that's how it's pronounced, because the defendant is saying that. Small point, I practice in Florida. If an attorney calls a witness by their first name, doesn't matter if it's the witness on the stand or any other witness in the trial, if you call them by their first name without their last name, you'll get a fine for that. And just in the real practice of law, a Mr. or a Miss with a last name is always the best way to go. Unless you're the plaintiff and you're talking about the defendant, then they are the defendant. Finally, for the defense, I thought the call order was a little weird for the defendant. Very rarely do I see the defendant being called second. Usually people either go first or they go last. I usually prefer last. is obviously completely up to you. I just thought the placement of second, when they said, we're calling Harper Martini, I was really surprised. And it's just because, I know it is a little weirder with the Zoom trial because we aren't seeing Harper, but only who's there for the whole trial, who can see the other witnesses. And my favorite thing to do when directing the defendant would be to have that as the last witness and just say, Miss Martini, we've heard a lot of really bad accusations today, and I want you to have the opportunity to address some of the things that we've heard, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4 on those things. And that way, not only are you directly addressing what's happening in the trial, which as a judge, I would love to see more of all around, but you're also kind of using Martini as your get out of jail free card. If something happens that you weren't expecting to get out, Harper that can then, combat it right there and then. But anyways, I know I'm taking too much of your time. Just a quick announcement is that closing ceremonies has been moved to 5 p.m. It was originally at 5:45, but Elliot, who is our tab director, is a god and he can do anything. So the link to get to that closing, if you don't have it already, is on the WFU mock trial web Twitter page to go to the live feed. If you have any questions, I'll certainly stick around for a few minutes extra. And as I said, I'm about to submit these Google comments. My email address is, there's no place to put overall comments. So I put overall comments on the plaintiff opening, and then I separate it to give notes on the plaintiff opening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you guys. Good luck.